Well, there is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Joining us here in Washington is the bureau chief for the Chicago Sun-Times, Lynn Sweet. With us from Virginia via Skype is historian Craig Shirley. He's written several best-selling books on U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Atiba Madyun is the president of Party Politics US, and joining us from Dallas is commentator and best-selling author Eric Bolling. His latest book is called The Swamp, Washington's Murky Pool of Corruption and Cronyism and How Trump Can Drain It. Welcome to all of you. Let's start in Dallas with Eric. And Eric, Bob Woodward variously describes the White House as chaotic, a dysfunctional place that is experiencing, quote, a nervous breakdown. We also heard in that report John Kelly being quoted as describing the White House as crazy town. What do you make of those characterizations?
Well, those are great terms and those are great passages that sell a lot of books, and Bob Woodward is going to sell a lot of books. And as you pointed out, almost completely, partially, you pointed out that the four people named in your piece, Secretary of Defense Mattis, Chief of Staff John Kelly, and Cohen and Porter, all those people have refuted the comments that were ascribed to them in the book. So I'm going to go back and say this. Donald Trump is of sound mind. He's completely succeeding on the fronts of the financial situation, economics in America, the security issue in America. We've never felt safer. Is he at times rough around the edges, a bulldozer rather than a scalpel? Sure, but I'll take the former two and worry about the last one later and let the Woodwards of the world sell books.
All right, on the question of authenticity in the book, let me bring in Craig Shirley from our Skype studio. Craig, Bob Woodward is a veteran Washington journalist. He's pretty meticulous. He's well known. He's got a good reputation. He's covered 9 presidencies. What did you make of the book?
I think you got to put it in historical context, is that anonymous letters, anonymous communications, anonymous leaks have been part of American politics since Benjamin Franklin wrote the letters he wrote, the Silence Dogood letters back in the 1760s. Lincoln was bedeviled by anonymous letters to the newspapers complaining about his conduct of the Civil War. In the election of 1824, there were millions of what were called coffin pamphlets distributed by supporters of John Quincy Adams, calling Andrew Jackson everything from crazy to an adulterer, attacking his wife, saying he wasn't really a hero of the Battle of New Orleans. The question is not that these things happen. These things have happened for over 200 years. The question is how you handle them. And I think the Trump administration is handling this very, very poorly because they're just drawing more sunlight to it. They're attacking it even more and thus giving it more credibility.
But Craig, would you put... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I think it was my point.
Yeah, no, I was going to ask, but would you put a big question mark over the reporting in this book?
Look, I've known Bob. I used to play poker with him. Is that he has been a reliable reporter. I myself don't use anonymous sources in my books. I don't like it. I think it calls into question the veracity of the book itself. Bob has had trouble in the past. I know personally from my experience with Bill Casey, who was a former CIA head, is that when Bill Casey was on his deathbed, he was anesthetized. He had brain cancer, and Woodward supposedly reported that Casey said he knew about the arms for hostages deal during the Reagan administration, and he said that he believed. But the doctors, the attending physicians, and the security around Casey at the time said there was no way that Bob Woodward stuck into Casey's hospital and talked to him that evening.
All right, let me bring it to the studio, to Lynn Sweet. Lynn, President Trump, as we heard, is fighting back. He's called this book fiction. He's called it a fraud. But we do get a considerable amount of detail on how this White House works or doesn't work, as the case may be. But on the broad thrust of what the book tells us, does anything in it surprise you or even shocks you?
No, because there actually there was not a new narrative in this book. There are some new details, some interesting quotes and observations, taking a piece of paper off the president's desk. But what is remarkable about the book is how little true new ground it plows in the narrative that you have a president who is a serial untruth teller. He's a fabricator. He is irresponsible and not wanting to get information, doesn't deal from facts, has no respect for process, pits people against each other, et cetera, et cetera. So that is, you know, it's interesting in that way that I was not really surprised by any revelation here, because to be a revelation, and this is not a book really about policy, it's a book about the chaos in the White House, and there have been plenty of reporting about that.
Does it tell you anything about the fact that national security may be threatened in the United States from what we know about what goes on in the White House?
Well, the threat would be if you have a president who is disengaged, disinterested in learning about the impact at hand, and is prone to want to shoot from the hip and not do a proper consultative process. One of the examples in the book is he is the operating principle, and this is what does come clear in the book and is an insight. The operating principle, if he has one to President Trump, is he wants to know what things cost. And if he thinks it's too much, why are we doing it? He doesn't see or appreciate that if we are paying billions to have U.S. military in South Korea, it's not just to help South Korea, it's also to help us. And so when he looks at everything as, the other thing that was in the book, I think we've read parts of it, if we have troops in Afghanistan, why aren't we taking the minerals out of there? As if the United States could come in as colonizers and just take something from a sovereign nation. So that is what is part of the story in the book. Parts of it have been told. The value of the book is that it is all in one place.
Atiba, most of, in fact, all the criticism in this book comes from the president's own party, from Republicans, from people that he has hired. Does that surprise you?
I guess. I mean, because what we see every day is the Republican Party taking up for the president. What we hear is the narrative is about the economy. You know, I think it's really important to go back to some of the things that have been said here on the panel. One, the economy is doing well for a very minute number of people in this country. And we keep hearing that being part of the narrative, that the president is doing well, that these tax cuts, but they are helping the wealthy. They aren't helping the people on the ground. They aren't helping the people who voted for him. The second part of that is, I think that the title of the book, we keep saying fear, but it's Fear Trump in the White House. So I think that there's a fear that's also, we talk about our country and national security. Well, we saw, I think, our national security a threat during this last election. There still is a lot of talk about how the election was won. The president, it seems like every day or whenever he's being attacked, goes back to no collusion with Russia. Well, to me, if a president comes in and tells us that the inauguration was the largest in history, and yet we see with our own eyes that it wasn't, it says something else. So we keep saying and talking about these untruths. The bottom line is that everything that we hear the president say is never substantiated with any fact.
Okay.
Can I just jump in here quickly on the tax cut?
I will get to you, Eric. I'm going to come to you next.
Here's the kind of detail in the book that does make it useful. Okay, so how did we get the rates? In other administrations, they study, they survey, they think, they crunch numbers. Here's what is said in the book, page 291. I want to know what the numbers are going to be, Trump said, throwing out numbers again. I think, and this is in terms of the cut, I think they ought to be 10, 20, and 25. He dismissed any effort to crunch the numbers. I don't care about any of that. This is what people can understand. That's how I'm going to sell it. So if you wonder, how did we even get the rates that you're talking about here, it's because he picked them.
Right. Eric, go ahead.
Well, I'd like to first step back at the gentleman who spoke just before Ms. Sweet did. And when he says that there are only a few people benefiting from this economy, that is the most ridiculous statement I may have ever heard on a panel. We're talking about an economy that's fully employed for several quarters, under 4%. We're talking a GDP that's north of 4%. So we have a GDP exceeding our unemployment rate. That's phenomenal. And you want to break it down a little bit further. There are more blacks working than ever in America. There are more women working than ever in America. There are more Hispanics working than ever in America. The economy is pumping on all cylinders for all the people, not just the wealthy, all the way up. Wages are up 2+.
That's not really the point of the book.
But that has not happened for the better part of 10 years.
Okay, Atiba, very quick response.
I just want to say, you say that blacks are working at a higher rate. They're not. They're not being reported.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
You said at the highest number.
Again, I did not say that. I said there are more blacks working in America than ever before. That's a fact.
Well, I'll disagree with you, and I'll disagree with you because...
You can disagree all you want, but you're wrong then.
It's okay. Well, let me just say this. What we keep hearing is this narrative that the economy is doing well for everyone, that there's not wage stagnation. Okay. What I would say and what I would offer is to go and talk to the people on Main Street who are arguing about this. And so, yes, we're not talking about this because of this in terms of the book, but in terms of the fear that is there is a great deal of fear of people, which is why we have this issue that's going on here of the president, because there's a great deal of fear and not a lot of hope.
I want to get to Craig, but Lynn, go ahead.
I just think when you terms of, the economic debate is one that Woodward did not address in the book. But that's because it's Woodward's book. And that's what Trump lamented when he did have that 11-minute phone call after the fact with him. I think there is, the use of the book is in seizing and taking this unique moment in history where you have a presidency in chaos with a president who has this disinterest in governing and makes things up.
Lynn, a presidency in chaos, you have an economy. Show me another country where the economics are so good.
How about this? I'm just pointing out the value of the book.
How about this? For the better part of the last 2 presidencies, Obama and Bush, we were fearful of a rising tide of terrorism. Al-Qaeda was on the run.
This is expanding. Eric, you're apropos of what? I don't get where this fits in on a discussion.
All right, I want to get back to the book. I want to get back to the book. Craig, I know you want to say something. Go ahead.
Well, just that, the comment was made earlier that it was mostly Republicans or all Republicans criticizing Woodward. Well, of course, because if it was all Democrats criticizing Trump, if it was all Democrats criticizing Trump, it wouldn't be very interesting. So, it's kind of a dog bites man story. I would. One thing I would think is that I want to make a point is that let's face it, is that most current historians, President Company accepted, of course, are liberals. And Reagan was in danger of drifting into irrelevancy because he was being beaten up by liberal historians. Same thing with Dwight Eisenhower. Same thing with other presidents. Calvin Coolidge. The only 2 American presidents who ever got a fair shake from liberal historians were Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt. But most 20th century Republicans have fared very, very poorly. So,
one more quick point. Very quick is one of the most fascinating things in this book that I wish Woodward had taught more about is he says on page 299 that Trump does not spend time with his 11-year-old son, Barron.
Okay, I want to get back to another thing in the book. Eric, we've heard this, we saw this in our report.
Is that a lot of presidents are busy being president and don't really have time to spend time with their children, and a lot of children grow up lamenting it. But he is busy being president. I think that's just cheap and gratuitous.
I just find it interesting. Interesting.
Eric, I want to get back to another point in the book. I mean, we heard this in our report. We've been talking about it here, the fact that some senior officials in the White House were taking documents off the president's desk so that he would not sign them. In one particular instance, a document, a letter about the U.S. withdrawing from the South Korea trade agreement, we heard that in our report, was taken off his desk. John Kelly, the chief of staff, apparently called the president an idiot. Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, said he behaves like a 5th or 6th grader. And I should say that both Kelly and Mattis have denied saying that. But
well, you should also add it on. You should also add Cohen and Porter, who's also today denied saying what was in the book as well. So all 4 of these examples have been denied. So of course Woodward is going to be explosive.
The more interesting question before we get to the denials is, I'd like to do things kind of in a tidy way. They didn't say that they didn't talk to Woodward. So question 1 is, if they were here, because Rob Porter is one of the stars of the book, along with Gary Cohn and Steve Bannon, did you talk to him? What is it you're saying you didn't say? This book is full of episodes with the people we've been talking about in it. So this blanket, I didn't say it, does beg the question, what is it you said you didn't say? Because there's just too many instances here.
But I'm going to ask Eric this. Eric, does it worry you that these kinds of things are being reported in the book, that papers were taken off the president's desk?
Here's what's happening, and people need to realize this. And I get calls from the BBC, from Canadian television, Norwegian television saying, what's going on with your president? Is he okay? And I continually tell them, here's a situation where Donald Trump, the businessman, comes into D.C. not having an infrastructure of political people around him, having to appoint Republicans in seats. Half of them, more than half of them, are probably anti-Trump Republicans. And of course, so you're going to have people pushing back on the Trump agenda from not only the left, the Obama holdovers, but the anti-Trumpers that he had to place in the seats because he had nowhere else to go. Right. It takes time. It's going to be tumultuous. But the man, when you look at the scorecard, security doing great, economy doing great. Is he vulgar and has a rough around the edges? Yes. But I'll take that and have wins on the other two important areas way more than the prior two presidents, or maybe three.
Okay, I have one other question on this issue. And Craig, I want to pose that question to you. One description in the book is about, quote, an administrative coup d'etat in the West Wing, where top unelected officials take over running the country. Let's take a listen to that.
The narrative that I've picked up in not only this book, but the opinion editorial suggests that that things are happening in spite of the president's leadership, and nothing could be further from the truth.
That was Mike Pence, the vice president, speaking there. Is that an apt description, an administrative coup d'etat?
Well, if there was a coup d'etat, then Mike Pence would be president, wouldn't he? I think it's kind of silly to venture into that, and Woodward should have done a better job, is that if there's a coup d'etat, then Trump wouldn't be president and Pence wouldn't be president. I think it's funny, parlor game, but it really is meaningless. There's no point to it. Is that Trump was in Pennsylvania today, the president of the United States. He'll be president tomorrow. There's no coup d'etat.
Right. It might be meaningless, and Lynn, Craig says it's meaningless, but even President Obama has expressed his concern over it. Let's listen to what the former president had to say.
The claim that everything will turn out okay because there are people inside the White House who secretly aren't following the president's orders. That is not a check. I'm being serious here. That's not how our democracy is supposed to work. These people aren't elected. They're not accountable.
President Obama, does he have a point there?
Well, he does, and this was his first speech of the midterm, kicking it off at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in the Heartland, in his adopted home state. Right. Of course, he has a point. One of the reasons this period of history that we're in is remarkable for the presidency is that no matter your politics, these are things happening about a unorthodox, norm-busting president and the people around him who worry about his disregard for the institutions that are built into governing, even if you're president, and the way that legislation and executive orders take shape, and the role of Congress. I mean, really, we don't have a lot of examples of a president ordering a Justice Department to find out who wrote a column that he didn't like.
Eric, we are, in some sense, being presented here in this book with some kind of parallel administration in the White House. That there's a bunch of people who believe that this is right, the president's wrong, so we'll do it our way. Is that subverting what the president wants to do?
Listen, you're taking Bob Woodward's book as as gospel, and frankly, it's not. I speak to Donald Trump quite often. I know him. I know Bill Shine, who's his chief communications officer. I know them. That is the most inaccurate description of what's going on inside that White House. It's amazing how on one breath the liberal or the left will tell you he's a dictator, he's overpowering, he wants to have his own way. And then on the other hand, Woodward will come in and say, oh, he has no control, it's all being done by puppeteers behind the scenes. It's none of those. The man is succeeding. I got to tell you something. By the way, you point out President Obama. This is a man who told us that the new norm for American economic growth should be 1.5%, which it was under his 8 years. Trump is pumping out 3.5%, 4% quarters, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, but this is only because of Obama. You got to stop, guys. It's okay. It's going to be okay. America's in good shape. Donald Trump is in and of his facilities, and he's frankly succeeding. Like it or not, he's your president. Get used to it.
Let's see what you want to respond to that.
succeeding for, I think, a portion of the country. He's not succeeding for the whole country. And I'm going to keep going back to the economy because what I'm saying and what I'm hearing and when people are telling us is, look, they're having a hard time finding a job, yet we keep hearing that we're at full employment. People are having a hard time finding jobs with wages that help them to make ends meet without having to work 2 and 3 jobs. So when I keep hearing that the economy is doing well and the president is doing so great, I disagree. And when I talk to my friends in other countries, when I talk to people in other countries and they're concerned about what they're seeing with our president, our security is not intact. When you look at what's going on with the EU, when you look at other countries now saying, well, we can't depend on the United States anymore, our security is not intact.
All right. Craig, there is one major revelation in the book, I think, I haven't seen it before, and that concerns the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad. President Trump at one point tells his defense secretary, Jim Mattis, that Assad should be killed, assassinated. Mattis ignores the president's request.
Right.
Have you heard of that happening before, Commander-in-Chief?
Sure, yes. John Kennedy ordered this, or is presumed, ordered the assassination of DM in 1962, is that the Eisenhower administration deposed the regime in Iraq and installed the Shah, is that presidents have meddled in foreign affairs and with foreign heads of states throughout the 20th century. Is that there's nothing new. I want to go back to the point, though, is that somebody made the point is that Trump gives orders and are followed. Guess what? That has happened to every president since George Washington. John Kennedy ordered the Jupiter-2 missiles, the obsolete Jupiter-2 missiles that were in Turkey, ordered them withdrawn from Turkey 6 times. And 6 times his orders were ignored and became a bone of contention in the Cuban Missile Crisis. Presidents give orders all the time. It doesn't mean people follow them.
Okay, I want to get to one other thing, one other development which happened after we heard about this book. Eric, recent polls show that President Trump's approval rating is in the mid to upper 30s. That's according to a CNN poll. His approval rating among independent voters, that's an important block of voters, plummeted to 31%. That's down 16 points in just 1 month. What does that tell you?
In his approval rating among his base and Republicans is hovering around 85 or 87%. It tells me that he's going to win in 2020. The man is, and by the way, all these attacks on the president, these anonymous op-eds written, posted in New York Times, all that does is solidify his base. It gets them louder and maybe sways some people who are in the middle to come over. I will tell you, if the economy is pumping out at this kind of rate in 2020, there is no chance anyone's going to beat him anywhere, period.
Atiba, very quickly, I've got 10 seconds.
17 years ago, we were attacked. I question, in this book, Fear, I'm fearful of what would happen if we were attacked again. What type of temperament this president has. This book right here, I think, is a roadmap for us to look forward to see how we resist.
Bob Woodward's book is a roadmap for the future for America?
It's a roadmap for us to see what it is that we're dealing with this president.
We are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us.